All right, it looks like we're at time, so let's go ahead and get started with today's webcast. I want to thank you all for joining us for the Around the Valuation World webcast today for December 16th, 2024. Before we get started with the presentation, I want to go over a few items. Can't get this to slide. What? It's kind of freezing up. While this is doing it, to obtain CP credit, just remember you have to answer all the poll questions that pop up on your screen during today's webcast. If you have an AVW subscription, your CP certificate will be available to you on your nacva.com portal within 7 to 10 business days after today's webcast. Let me just stop share for some reason. It's not having no issues. Okay, there we go. Let me just try to share again. Sorry about that. Okay. And so if you do need CPE and you don't have a subscription, there is a link to subscribe in your materials today. And with Around the Valuation World, we try to cover all the upcoming events and hot topics in the industry. However, with the 2 hours that we have each month, we don't have enough time to cover all the topics. So there is a page with different links in your materials where you can access some additional information that we pull from as well, just to stay abreast with what's going on in the industry. And with that, we have Mel and Alina joining us today, who are our editors, and I'm going to turn the time over to them, who will get us started with the presentation today.
Thank you, Chinda. Thank you, and welcome to actually the last AVW for the year. So good to be here. We've got a great program for you today. The first two segments are going to be with one of the favorites, Michael Gregory. He's going to talk about some industry headlines, some things to consider. His sessions are always full of information, but then we have to go with a deeper dive, and he gives us all the resources to make that happen. And then he's going to be interviewing Mark Bovee, talking about IRS and business valuation issues with respect to the IRS right after that. Then we'll have Carla Nunes and Jim Harrington talking about a global economic update, which ought to be interesting. And then Alan Zipp will follow up with our honorable judges. This one ought to be interesting, how expert witnesses should be handled when there's a lying opposing experts and everything. So I'm looking forward to that. And then we'll finish up with a grow and build your practice session around pro bono finance support and marginalized entrepreneurs. So let's get to the first session, which is industry headlines with Michael Gregory. He is one of the top presenters on AVW for many, many years. And he does a lot of BV mediation, negotiation. He spent a lot of years with the IRS in the valuation realm and everything, and has written numerous books around these topics, and is probably one of the most interesting presenters that we have on this. So I'm gonna turn the time over to you, Michael, and let you take it away in this session and the session following.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mel. You're too kind with your introduction, but thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with you. I'm on this each month, so most of you probably know who I am. Here's just a little bit of background. I worked at the IRS for 28 years. I've been in the private sector since 2011. And today I'm going to give you my normal session on the technical issues. Then I'm going to interview an IRS senior appraiser in business valuation, give you some insights from his perspective. So we're looking forward to that as a second element in the presentation today. But I'm more than happy to share with you some updates on some interesting information. I'm going to focus on 6 different articles. The first is value creation strategies for improving financial viability before selling. This is something that can be very valuable to you as an appraiser, as you might help out one of your clients that's in this situation. The continuing evolution of the build-up method, some new information on that I'll share. BV myths, busters, tackle, exit, multiple versus Gordon growth models. So a comparison of those two and some sources on that. Business valuation resources lends a helping hand in wake of disasters, on helping you with a couple of different articles, a couple of different chapters from a book that can help you if you're involved with taking a look at those types of issues. And then the October 2024 issue of Willamette's Perspective is released. That's always got always has very good articles, and I'm going to be sharing with you some information from those articles that you can download and look at. And finally, discount on assets transferred shortly before death raises a red flag. And I'll share a recent U.S. tax court case of some problems that were done because of how that was handled. So in terms of our objectives for today, consider how you can add value for a selling client. That can be an additional element for you as a business valuer. Identify innovations with the build-up method. Access Hitchner's Myth Buster on Gordon Growth Model. Select 2 free chapters on damages and lost profits. Evaluate 3 articles from Willamette. And recognize discount and family limited partnerships may not be applicable in all situations. The first one, this is I thought, a very good article in the Value Examiner. We all get this as members of NACVA, and sometimes you skip through articles or skim them or don't have time. But if you're involved in this at all, this is an excellent article. Points out, first of all, only 10% of businesses that want to sell. So you have to have someone who wants to buy that. And what are the values they see in buying that, and how do you value something that they want to buy? So 9 business model components made up of offerings, customers, infrastructure, and financial viability are introduced to you at first in the article. Then how do you offer value creation suggestions? So how do you bring this up to a client and see if this is something they are interested in and you can help them with? And how long does it take to see observable, measurable results? So you want to be starting this well ahead of time. It's not something that, oh, I want to sell in 6 months. What do I do? These are things you want to work on long term. And then in terms of cost structure improvements, what can you do to reduce costs? They have 8 ideas in that article. And in terms of revenue stream improvements, they have 11 ideas that you can bring up with your client. And then value advisors can help identify how to help sellers improve market viability. And finally, the earlier the sellers start, the better. So with that in mind, really good article. I'd say if you're interested in that at all, you want to make sure you look at that one. The continuing evolution of the build-up method. This is an article by Ron Signor. The build-up method's been around a long time. It's been around since 1982, and Jim Schultz came up with a table with 5 broad categories to consider with the build-up method. But this method includes both systemic and unsystemic risk. And also, as we know, it's a discount rate minus the growth rate is a capitalization rate. But in this article, he runs through a number of things. I'm just summarizing this for you so you can take a look at the article. The cost of capital toolbox. Mike Porter gives 5 forces of a framework of what you want to consider when you're using the build-up method. The McKinsey 7S model identifies 7 elements to consider. Then you want to think about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in terms of that analysis. There's what's called the DuPont model, has 3 different components for return on equity. There are 5 empirical-based resources that he shares with you in the article. And finally, he talks about using the CRISP data in the 10th decile, which is a 10th decile A and B, and what might be appropriate. And the last element comes forward with business characteristics and a risk factor summary of factors to consider. He has 38 factors to consider in that method, that article. Now, I subscribe to Jim Hitchner, and Jim Hitchner has an article that comes out every month with valuation products and services that cost $99 a year. And every month he's coming out with something recently. It's like business valuation, Mythbusters tackle multiple versus Gordon growth model. In this case, he compares the methodologies of both models. Then he says, here at Valuation Products and Services, I've got this panel of experts I brought in on this, and here's what they came up with. And they said, these are the ways that you can address common errors, that when people apply these models, they don't apply them correctly. And he also provides some food for thought from these panel members on other things to consider when you're using these models, and when to consider which and why, and one might be better than the other. And it's in the October 21, it's in the October Valuation Products and Services newsletter. Then BV Resources lends a helping hand in the wake of disasters. This is really nice of them, I thought. There's a book called The Comprehensive Guide to Economic Damages, 7th edition, and they said, to help out business valuers that might be looking at damages claims, looking at recent hurricanes and major storms and fires across America, they're providing for free Chapter 9 on context of the lost profits damages claim, and Chapter 45, business interruption and damages claim. So they're saying, yes, you could buy our book, but really these are the 2 chapters that are pertinent to disasters, and we're making them available to you for free. So you might want to download those. And then the third thing they did is they have a video clip from BBR Symposium on calculating damages for insured claims. And how do you calculate damages where the person is also insured? Maybe they're not going to get fully reimbursed. How do you calculate those kind of damages, and what are the limitations associated with it? And I have the links for those in my presentation here too. Then October 2024, Willamette comes out with periodic publications of articles. So I looked at their articles, and sometimes I pull one, sometimes two, sometimes three. This time I pulled 3 different articles. Key considerations in the valuation of carried interest from a tax perspective, digging in the dirt, performing forensic analysis of financial records for valuation purposes, and jointly retained valuation engagements, a roadmap for trust and cooperation. I particularly like the last one because, you know, I'm a collaboration effect guy. So I'm looking at collaboration and working with others and how can you do that more effectively. And this points out how you could do this in your practice and work with others in this arena. And then discounts on assets transferred shortly before death raises a red flag. This is a U.S. tax court case. There's an FLP set up just before the death of the primary person. And with that, they transferred $17 million to an FLP through a nephew. And the nephew helped also structure this. So the nephew's an attorney, helped structure it, and says, okay, we're going to have a POA. The FLP is going to have a 99.994 limited partnership interest. Well, the estate took a discount at 10.8 million. But looking at code section 2036A, and that's something if you're working for the IRS, that an attorney will look at 2036A and needs to make sure they did their things right. I'm just bringing attention to you with the facts in this case. The court says why this did not meet 2036a. It says the tax law was not a bona fide sale. She retained an economic benefit and control, and it was so poor what this attorney put together, the court affirmed the IRS and applied interest and penalties back to the nephew who put this whole thing together, and there was no FLP discount allowed. So here are the sources for these things. Here's Hardball with Hitchner. That's where you can go to pick that up. Here's Chapter 9 on context of the lost profits damages claim. This is the Chapter 45, business interruption and damage claims. You can download that. This is the video on calculating damages for insured claims by Jonathan Dinitz. Then 3 business articles from Willamette. That's where you can download those. And this is the U.S. tax court case. If you want to see why the 2036A issue was applied and the taxpayer could not have a family limited partnership with a discount in it, you can do that. And then what I've done is normally I've put some of these in the back, but in the course of this past year, these are all the different sources that I used in the presentations that we have. And next month, I'll do a summary of all the Around the Valuation World presentations that I'm doing in this 10-minute slot each month. And this is, of course, my contact information. And if I can be of assistance to you on anything, feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'm more than happy to assist. With that, I'm going to move into the next section. Oh, and we have a questionnaire that just came up. I'm going to just downsize that. You want to make sure you answer that question for CPE credit. I'm going to introduce to you Mark Bovee. You know who I am. I'm going to introduce to you Mark Bovee. He is a lead appraiser with the IRS. And the IRS has different technical parties. They also have appraisers that are both real property and valuers that do business valuation. Within a given group, they'll promote someone to become the lead appraiser of a group, meaning that's the top technical person in your group. They don't have any management duties, but they are there to assist others. He's been with the IRS for 5 years, and he has over 25 years of appraisal experience in valuation and economic consulting and analytics experience. He is the lead appraiser in Jacksonville, Florida. He's a CVA. He is an accredited senior appraiser with the American Society of Appraisers, and he's a member of the Appraisal Institute because he has a background in real property, and he also has a background in business valuation. So to introduce Mark, I'm going to say, can you tell us a little bit about first, where'd you grow up? And then what did you do in your first career? And then what did you do in your next career when you left the military? And tell us a little bit about your background there. And then finally, you came to work for the IRS, and what is it you're doing at the IRS? So Mark, share a little bit about yourself with us, please.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. And good day to everybody. I grew up in South Central Michigan, a small community. I went to college at Michigan State University. I served 22 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, retired as an officer. So I saw a lot of the world and was stationed on both the East and West Coast of the United States. I got into private practice, started off in real estate, kind of went into the BV side of the valuation practice. So I had about 22 years experience there, and then joined the IRS about a little over 5 years ago, moved down here to Jacksonville, Florida. And I work in engineering. It's called engineering and valuation now. And just for a little background, the engineering and valuation part of the IRS works mostly issues dealing with engineering, like research credit, cost segregation, and then of course the valuation people. We look at both real estate and business valuations. For business valuation individuals, most of the work you're going to probably do is going to be estate or gift work, and that's where we would probably see the bulk of the work that we review.
And I'll just clarify for others here, he's in the engineering program because when Congress first initiated the ability, or sorry, when there was an amendment passed, it was the 16th Amendment, 1913, to have the first national tax assessments against the American population or with the American population. The first returns were filed in 1913, and then in 1914 is when they had the first audits. And at that time, depreciation was based on facts and circumstances, and there's depreciation and depletion. And the CPAs working at the IRS said, we don't know how to do that. And they said, we need to hire some people to do that. And they hired engineers. So the title of engineers are folks who do not have a background specifically in being an accountant like a CPA. So you've got engineers and business valuers, you've got real property appraisers, you've got geologists, you have foresters, you've got a number of different disciplines. And that all fits within the engineering program. But Mark, on the issues related to business valuation. So let's say, and just to help others understand here too, Mark is in the large business and international division. That's where all the engineers are, but they service all the divisions of the IRS. There's another division called Small Business Self-Employed. In that division is where it's called the Estate and Gift, or the acronym is E&G. The Estate and Gift Tax Program is there. It's about 2/3 the size of the engineering program. And when the folks in Estate and Gift want to have assistance in valuation, they ask for assistance from the engineering program. And that's where Mark would come in. They'd go to his boss and say, we're looking for some assistance. And Mark and the other business valuers in his group would be associated with analyzing those. And there are 3 major job aids that the IRS has released to the public: discount for lack of marketability, reasonable compensation, and S-corp valuations. So Mark, when you think of issues, and primarily the folks that are on this call are related to estate and gift tax areas, what do you see as the major business valuation issues that you might work on, or other members of your group or other groups? But clearly Florida has a lot of work with a lot of retirees. So from your perspective, what are the major issues that you would like to educate this group with what you work on?
Well, most of the business valuation issues, what we tend to run across in the estate and gift area, we still don't have a definitive ruling on tax affecting S corporations. That just seems to be an ongoing issue. And we have, we look at DLOCs and DLOMs, those kinds of things we're going to look at in business valuations. There was some issues about insurance that had come up. How do we treat, insurance policies? But those types of issues you're likely to see if you're, at the IRS. And the number of issues business valuators are going to see are probably going to be way more diverse than that. But we tend to see those. And there are other issues, I can say.
Well, I know I identified 3 of the major ones, and I know, like with reasonable compensation, the IRS also has which is called a issue practice network. And in that issue practice network, those folks cannot come out on case but they can provide you with information. They have access to a host of different markets data sets. They also have access to other things that the rest of the IRS does not. And they can consult on cases, but they can't come out on cases. When you're talking about other issues, you want to make any comment? Do you see much in the way of math errors? It used to be about when I was there. I retired from 2011 with the IRS, and I headed up business valuation at that time. But about a third of the cases we would find math errors. Are you finding much in the way of math errors today when you go back and check individuals' work, or do you find issues like they used the wrong standard for value, or they used the wrong valuation date, or various things? Do you find those kind of things today too?
I normally don't see a lot of math issues. I would, if a person's a professional valuer, I wouldn't expect to see that either, to be quite frank with you. But I haven't seen that. And as far as wrong dates, now wrong dates could happen. I haven't seen that, but I suppose it could happen. We're looking more, I think what you end up doing when you look at a lot of these reports, you end up looking at just technical issues. And you don't see simple issues like that, which is, I guess, kind of good for the profession overall.
Do you have any comments you'd like to make on how individuals could write better reports? Or is there other things that are missing, or you'd like to see expansion on certain things? Like, let's just say you have a discount for lack of marketability, and they may have used 3 different methods. And sometimes what might happen is you might get, here's a whole boilerplate section, and it says the value is such and such, whatever it might be. Are you looking for a reconciliation where they took a look at the 3 methods and said, this one I gave greater weight to, or medium weight, or less weight to, and then I came up with this? Are you looking for things like that in reports, or is it pretty much, are they doing that today?
Yeah, I don't really have anything as specific. The IRS doesn't really publish anything, as far as I know, specifically about, what their policy would be as to what they're looking for. It's kind of case by case basis. But I would say this just as a professional valuation person, when I was in private practice, and also when I do write some stuff here, if you're making, a DLOM or DLOC, that's something that you're going to have to explain in the report. And everybody's idea of what the explanation should be could be different. But again, it's kind of case specific too.
But what you're looking for is you're looking for the detail. You need to understand the why. So if you just put in boilerplate, that doesn't cut it.
Yeah, exactly. What is the logic behind this? That helps the reviewer. That would help any reviewer. And it would be certainly something, if you were doing general litigation in court, you would want to write something in your report that at least could explain your conclusion there. Just from my practice in the private practice, you'd want to write that, if you're writing it for court in general.
And I should have mentioned at the beginning, and I'm going to mention this now. Mark making his comments here, he's not speaking for the IRS. He's speaking for himself. These are his own views. And I'm asking him to give his honest commentary of what he thinks based on his experience. And I'm letting you know, I really feel good about this interview, and I feel really good about Mark being here, because this is the first time we've been able to bring somebody at a frontline level who's a senior business appraiser with the IRS to come and give their opinions and share with you their thoughts with what they see, and share with you what they may want to ask you to do relative to your work. So the IRS had a plan. And I know that through July of 2024, the goal was to get to 400 engineers. And I know in working with other folks at the IRS, that didn't develop. It grew into about 320. And I know they're still hiring, or they were still hiring engineers. We're going through some changes there at the IRS. You're going through some changes there at the IRS right now, and there's a new administration coming in, and they're talking about what they might do in terms of reducing government jobs, and also reducing the budget of the federal government, or reducing the budget of the federal government, also reducing the number of federal employees. Has any of that had any impact on what you see within your group and what's going on there?
Well, I don't really, that's way above my head.
Right.
So I can't really comment on that. I think people at the frontline level, we just come in and do, we have an assignment, we do the assignment. And so I really don't know. I don't know if anybody really knows what the end strength of the IRS is going to look like, you know, a year from now. So,
Do you have a
that's what-
freeze? Do you have a freeze currently, Mark?
there is a short term, they call it a pause, and I
Okay.
think that's public knowledge. So, that's going on. But again, I don't think anybody really knows. We've got a new commissioner coming in. We just really don't know where we're going to be until, you know, until we get down the road a while. We'll see where we're going to be at.
I think the whole country's in that mode. Nobody knows. There's been a
Yeah.
lot of political promises on things, and what will happen, we don't know. But it is important to realize the IRS has a pause right now. So the pause on hiring, so the word isn't freeze, but the pause they have on hiring is let's wait and see. They're under continuing resolutions. We don't have a budget for the year. So what will happen? Mark doesn't know. We don't know. He's a federal employee, and a guy working for the IRS has to say, you know, until the House passes a bill, the Senate passes a bill, it goes to a conference committee, and then it's signed by the president, then we'll know what the law is. But up until that point, it's pure speculation, because the way laws are made, it's like making sausage. And that's kind of at the service. I know I'd caution my employees, like, what do you think? I'd say, we never know until the law is passed. So, and you think about, you've got a host of business valuers online here and listening. Are there things you want them to know? Because you're primarily oriented towards improving voluntary compliance. You are not evaluated by adjustments or audits and those kind of things. You are evaluated by improving voluntary compliance. So along those lines, what do you want this audience to know about business valuation?
Well, I can just say in general that, from what my experience is that most of business valuation reports are, you know, they're understandable. They're certainly, you know, we may not agree with everything, but they're understandable, they're readable. And when I would say to people who write reports, you know, if it's for a state and gift or whatever it might be, always keep in the back of your mind that case could end up in U.S. tax court at some point. It's going to be way down the road, 5-6 years if it does. And that whole process of going through tax court could add additional expert witnesses to the case on both sides. So it's a long process. And when you're in examination like I am, you have a kind of a small part of it. You do the initial screen for the report, you look at it, and you know, there's a lot of resources for both business and real estate appraisers out there. You've got your NACFA resources. You've got the ASA's got a lot of resources. You've got Mike just went over some of the resources. We have those same resources. We do use them, and I would suggest use the resources. Yeah, that's what I would say kind of on that.
So when you're saying use resources, what I'm hearing you say is the ASA has standards and they have a checklist of things you need to have in your reports.
Yes.
That's not, and it says it's not an all-inclusive checklist, but there's a checklist. And then NACFA has standards, and the standards say this is the kind of thing you want to have in your report. And for the most part, what I hear you saying is most appraisers, let's just say we're talking about a CVA within a CVA, most appraisers are good in that they are a qualified appraiser. They write qualified appraisals. Again, you may disagree, but for the most part, your advice is you need to follow your standards and make sure that you meet all the elements associated with your standards. Is that pretty much what you're saying?
Yeah, standards, USPAP's a big one. We're going to look at USPAP. And that's kind of, and then you also have the standards specifically to the tax law. If there's a standard in the IRM, which is the Internal Revenue Manual, or if there's a different standard that might come into play. So you're kind of integrating, appraisers kind of integrate tax law and valuation issues, which is kind of a little different than other appraisers might do. So if you're doing a valuation, let's say for a Section 48 renewable tax credit, that might be a little different than if you're doing, you know, just a valuation of an interest in a closely held company.
And as you think about some of the concerns that you've seen in appraisals, can you share with us some examples of where you've seen problems in appraisals? What kind of problems have you seen?
I'm gonna kind of pass on that, Mike. I think the problems in general, I really don't have a general. I've just seen issues. The problem, some of the problems you might see, and I'm just going to kind of throw this out, is you may not have a great explanation on things. There's you go through the report and somewhere in there's a line item adjustment or something, and you kind of ask, okay, where'd this line item adjustment come from? And that's the kind of thing that reviewers are going to look at, whether you're at the IRS or whether you're in a general litigation context. People are going to look at that and say, okay, I don't understand this.
Now, you were in the private sector and you've testified in court, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and with the IRS, have you testified yet in any federal courts?
I have not. The way the IRS works generally is in being an examination. A lot of people in an examination and engineering valuation won't testify. Some do, but we normally hire outside experts. If you go back to what was one of our big cases, go back to the Michael Jackson estate. There was the NIL issue. There was the S Corp issue. We hired outside experts. The Jackson estate hired a lot of outside experts. And that the experts that we hired weren't people that necessarily work in the IRS. They're outside experts hired by chief counsel's office. And that's usually what happens on our tax court cases.
Now, since you brought up that case, I will just make a comment. Like when I speak to ASA or NACVA, and I just spoke to them last week on Friday, I point out, like in the Michael Jackson case, there were 3 major issues. And the major issues went 100% for the taxpayer, 97% for the taxpayer, and 94% for the IRS. And what that is a clear demonstration of is the head of the tax court back 10 years, well, now back 15 years ago said, basically somebody's going to win that issue. And the courts may tweak that issue, but whoever is most reasonable, they're going to go with that, and then it'll be that number or something similar to it. So I use the Michael Jackson case as an example of 100% taxpayer, 97% taxpayer, and 94% IRS. The 94% IRS element dealt with the tax affecting of the S Corp. And the other two, basically the taxpayer won on those versus what the IRS had. I'm not picking on IRS or taxpayer. I'm just pointing out the court wants to see a reasonable commentary and understand the assumptions associated with it. And as I say that to you, Mark, are you also just saying as a business valuation appraiser team lead with the IRS, if someone comes up with something that you deem as reasonable, that's something that you can have a no change on. But if something's got problems with it, then you're going to have to address those because the reasonableness standard really hasn't been met. You want to comment?
Yeah, I saw a comment in text chat from Ronald. Why'd I go over to the dark side? I kind of like Florida, Ron. That's kind of where I'm at with this. Again, it's a review process at the IRS, an examination, and it's a long process, and we may disagree with the taxpayer's appraiser. There's an appeals process that the taxpayer can go through. And then there's always tax court or U.S. district court, depending on what the issue might be. So all I can say on that is disagreements happen when we do this work, and sometimes you're going to get disagreements. But there are a lot of reports you look at that are also no change reports. So,
if you had to say where things are and where things might be going, you've been there 5 years. Have you seen changes over that 5-year period on what kind of issues are new or emerging, or you're seeing more of, or which ones you're seeing less of? The appraisers tend to be doing a better job, so you see less types of issues of certain types. Any comments on what you've seen over the 5 years that you've been there?
No, not really. I can't think of any particular issue that is we would consistently disagree with on valuation. Again, like I said before, the S corporation, that the tax affecting S corps is still an issue that doesn't appear to be resolved right now. At some point, that's going to get the tax court and get up through the appellate courts. Hopefully, we can get a good answer on that. But I haven't really seen any consistent issue that would say, hey, you know, things appraisers might want to look at these closer.
And on the S corp issue, the IRS does have that job aid, and the executive summary makes comments about not tax affecting, but in the detail of that job aid, it indicates there are times when tax affecting might be appropriate. There might be a higher discount rate, and there might be a higher DLOM associated with the S corp versus the C corp based on different issues. And the bottom line is, if what the taxpayer comes up with is a reasonable number at the end, regardless of how they got there, if you deem that to be reasonable, that is a no change. Wouldn't that be correct?
It could be. I can't specifically say one way or another, Mike. Sure. It would be, it's all circumstantial basically. So we'd have to look at it. I would say to the audience is, if that's something you're really interested in, there, records from U.S. Tax Court are publicly available. So I don't know if I think you have to buy a subscription to it, but you can go in and any report that's offered into evidence, and in tax court, your report is your direct evidence. You basically go, you get on the stand, they ask you a few questions, then you start off, you go right into cross-examination. But those reports are all public record once it gets into U.S. Tax Court. So you, as valuation professionals, you have an opportunity to get those and look through those if that's something you'd be interested in. And you can kind of see what people have written and what the issues, you know, in the tax court's decision, you can always see what the issues are and how the court addressed those issues.
Mark, any closing comments you want to share with the audience?
Not really. I want to just say thanks for everybody for being on the call. And again, the IRS's job is service to the taxpayers and tax compliance. So I wish everybody a happy holiday and or happy New Year, Merry Christmas.
Well, thank you, Mark. Glad that you were here. Appreciate what you had to say, everything you had to share with us. And with that, before I pass it over to Chinda, who's going to provide us with something, I just want to say after that, Carla, Nunes, and Jim Harrington are coming on board. It was my pleasure to introduce them with Around the Valuation World on Friday in the morning, and then to sit in their presentation. Great presentation. That's coming up in a few minutes. I hope you all enjoy it. Take care, everybody. Thank you very much, Mark. Take care.
Thanks, Mike.
Great, thanks, Mike. Before we proceed, I want to take a moment to honor we have a bunch of awards that we honor our membership. One is the Thomas Porter Lifetime Achievement Award. We have the Instructor Awards, the Circle of Light, Instructor of the Year, Instructor of Exceptional Distinction, along with other awards. And so I want to take a minute to recognize those individuals with a video. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Get that started. Right. I want to thank everyone for all that they've done throughout the year in receiving those awards. Uh, let's see. So I just want before I send it over to Alina, I want to let everybody know that the second poll question is up. So please remember to respond to those to receive CP credit. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Alina.
Thank you, Shonda. And now we have Carla Nunes. She's one of our experts from Kroll. And last week, she joined us in person at our annual conference in Las Vegas. And her presentation is always a big hit. So today she will be giving us a recap of that presentation, sharing the key highlights and must-know insights on the global economic update and the impacts and cost of capital and valuation. Carla? Great having you today.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me today, Alina, Shanda, and everyone. And Mike, thank you so much for interviewing us at the conference last week on Friday. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Jim was like, he thought he was going to join us, but he is on vacation. He stayed in Vegas. So I could see as, maybe he's not, with the time zone and everything, he's not there. I'll go ahead and present. Let me just put this in presenter mode. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Alina, that's
Yes, it's perfect right now.
perfect. Perfect. All right. So this is just going to be like Jim and I were talking for I don't know, an hour and 40 minutes. So this is just some highlights, and some slides are actually updated because when we had to deliver our presentation, we had a timeline when to present our slides. So these have a little bit of an update. So we are going to cover today a little bit of an update on current economic conditions, where we're talking about long-term projected economic growth, and just a little highlight on financial market performance. So where are we today? All right, let's get started. Since COVID, we've been showing, the impact of both monetary and fiscal policies in valuations, in the economy, in interest rates, etc. So we like to start with the context of like, why were they so material for the economy and for how businesses are dealing with what we see today. So the first one is monetary policy. So what has happened since COVID with monetary policy? This chart shows you the combined central bank balance sheets of the major banks in the developed world. So the Fed, or Federal Reserve in the United States, the ECB, European Central Bank, and they control the Eurozone monetary policy, the Bank of Japan, or BOJ, and the Bank of England. Believe it or not, the Canadian bank, the Central Bank of Canada, is actually quite small, relatively speaking. Even the Bank of England here, you can see it's small. This shows the assets that they hold. And by assets means they buy, these central banks, available securities like government bonds. And some of them even bought corporate bonds, as well as stocks. Japan is well known to buy a significant amount of stocks through ETFs. And of course, these are arguably non-market participants. They're not investors. They're using this to control, some of the movements, for example, in interest rates, or in the case of Japan, also making sure that, there isn't, a collapse in stock markets in Japan. So it is a non-market participant influencing markets through their acquisitions or purchases of assets, of securities. And what we can see is since COVID, even though the trend had started after the global financial crisis of 08, 09, since COVID, the double down on the size of the balance sheets. And their objective was very clear. They said it. Their hope was, by buying a lot of the available stock of government bonds, particularly long-term ones, is that they would influence interest rates. How does that work? Well, if you buy a lot of something and the supply doesn't go up by a lot, then prices go up. And in the case of bonds, yields go down. And so that was their intent, was to make sure that available capital was very cheap for companies to access. And in fact, the Fed here in the US after COVID, for the first time ever, they actually bought corporate bonds so that they wouldn't go into default, which is something that only the Bank of Japan and other central banks had done, but not the US. That was a first. Now, they have started since the peak in February 22, after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which contributed to an increase in inflation to 40-year highs in a number of countries. They started not selling their securities, but instead, if something matures, like a bond expires, they will not buy another one to replace it. So we have seen a decline in the size of the balance sheets, but it's still way above where it was pre-pandemic. So since the peak, the US has declined by 22%, but it's still much higher. So what some economists call it is that on QE, so quantitative easing, is like a drug, like cocaine or heroin, that once you get into it, you are not able to get out of. So what we could see potentially is the Fed and other central banks still holding a lot more of assets than they did prior to the pandemic. And that has an implication on interest rates. The other side of the equation was fiscal policy. What happened during COVID? And the fiscal policy, I mean, we've had this graph before, but it's been updated to reflect new estimates by the Bureau of Economic Analysis on what the size of the economy, as measured by nominal GDP of the United States, what that is. And what we see is that after the revisions, economic growth did not collapse that much. It only went down in nominal terms by 0.9% from 2019 to 2020. When we first put together this chart, it was more like, it seemed like it had dropped by about 3%. So it didn't drop by that much. And yet we put together as a country in the US a fiscal package through successive packages or stimulus packages of about $5.7 trillion, which is far in excess of what we saw in decline. Importantly, two of these packages that account for almost $3 trillion, so in excess of what's, like more than half of what's in there, were passed either in December of 2020 or in March of 2021, when there wasn't need for those packages anymore. The economy didn't drop by that much. The result of that, by sending checks to people and all of these other, facilities, what happened was like it created an incentive for people who were hesitant to go back to work for whatever reason. They had a safety net, and so that caused a lot of labor supply shortages. So that was one. We also had obviously supply chain disruptions, because if people aren't working, then we don't have enough products produced, and again causing a supply shock. And then, of course, if people are at home and have more money than they usually would have, they want to buy things, and that causes an even additional issue with these supply chain and inflationary pressures. So that's really, this created the perfect breeding ground for inflation to be such a big phenomenon. That hadn't happened for 40 years in the US. Now, did we stop at that? Well, not really. Like, under the Biden administration, additional packages were introduced to the tune of more or less $3 trillion, although this is over a 10-year period, whereas the other 5.7 trillion were like really in 1 year that they occurred. And so this includes bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Act, the IRA or Inflation Reduction Act, and the SAVE plan and other student debt relief programs. So we've had already a lot of loans, despite a challenge that is right now in the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. There's at least 169 billion of relief that has been already approved, meaning that they're not going to take that back. They're not going to claw back. So a chunk of this has already been incurred. The one that hasn't been incurred significantly, or that could still be rolled back, is the IRA. And there's a lot of conversations about, President-elect Trump said he would roll it out. That is just a subsidy to green, green projects that really shouldn't exist, etc. That he was going to roll out most of that. And the reality is that may not be the case, because a lot of the states that have been benefiting from the subsidies or expectation of subsidies from the IRA are actually red states, Texas and some of the southern states that have implemented a lot of renewable projects that they have began under the expectation that they would be co-funded by subsidies or tax credits from the government. So the promise by President-elect Trump to roll out or scale back the IRA may not be as much as campaign promises would say. But regardless, there are consequences for so much spending, and there's additional spending that it's been promised by President Trump, for example, to reinstate the 2017 TCJA, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions, like, for example, for individuals to continue to have the lower tax rates, or for companies. He even promised, so some things that both parties would agree on, like bonus depreciation, maybe R&D, immediate expensing instead of capitalizing over 5 or 15 years, interest expense limitations. Some of those business provisions actually had bipartisan agreement, and so they may actually go through more quickly. But because the Democrats in Senate and House will likely not be in favor of the plans that the new administration has, all of the promise of new spending or new cuts may have to be accomplished through a budget reconciliation process, so that you don't increase the debt significantly. If that isn't done, if they were to pass all those things without an offset, it would be troublesome, because it could add another $7 to $8 trillion of debt to the nominal debt held by the U.S. And that's a problem, because even this is what this chart shows, the existing debt to GDP has been increasing significantly. It has gone from what it used to be 35% up to the global financial crisis of 2008. Then it started progressively going up, and this is debt held by the public, meaning the one that it's held by investors or by the Fed, for example, government bonds held by the Fed. And so it progressively went to 100%, and it's very close to 100% right now, like around 95%. The CBO had said that, by the way, that this was an unsustainable path even under current law. The problem of having too much debt, if you go to like in the level of, let's just call it 150%, for example, that's investors start having less confidence that, the government will meet its obligations on time. And that puts an upward pressure on long-term interest rates. So the risk-free rate might stay higher for longer as a result of this, concern by investors of like an unsustainable path of rising debt. Now, all of these measures, though, really benefited in the short run the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy has been a highlight of the global economy. They have been growing at a much faster pace than anyone else. And, we sitting in 2022, I talked to a lot of economists who guaranteed me that we would be in a recession in 2023. Then in 2023, they said, yes, we definitely will be in a recession in 2024. And part of that is that they were using historical data that shows, for example, when you have an inverted yield curve, meaning that, say, the two-year yield is higher than the 10-year yield. That's an example. Or the 3-month bill yield is higher than the 10-year yield. So those measures in the past were reasonable predictors of a recession 12 months after. And that hasn't happened because these times are not something we can repeat, because the amount of fiscal stimulus that we put into the economy was equivalent to fighting World War II. Only in World War II was it as a percentage of GDP higher than now. Now it was 27%. Only then was even higher. So it's like we put as much, we infused liquidity into the system and cash into the economy that really enabled, consumers who account for 70% of GDP, real GDP, that to continue to consume. They also have jobs. We have job creation here. Just as a ballpark, think about if about 200,000 jobs are being created in the economy, it means a hot market. It means that you have demand. Companies are expecting demand to continue to increase, and they have a need for employees, and so they keep trying to hire. And so that's, if you are below 100, then you're in a bad spot, meaning like you're starting to have the job market might signal problems ahead. Now here, what we had was in October, very odd numbers impacted by the hurricanes. We had 2 hurricanes coming through that really messed up the statistics. So it's not a good, reflection of the economy. But so is November, an effect of, recovering some of the jobs that were lost in October. So I wouldn't say this is a good proxy for us to see where we are. I think December will be back to normal, and that's when we'll be able to see where are we in that, like 100 to 200,000 jobs being created each month. The unemployment rate had stayed stagnant for 4.1% for a while, and now it ticked up to 4.2. So it does say that the job market is cooling down, but it's still very low, the unemployment rate by historical standards. So this shows you in the gray vertical bars where we had recessions. And we can see that in prior recessions, the unemployment rate was way higher than 4.2%. In fact, 4.2% is still, historically speaking, quite low. So people having jobs means that they can still have, purchasing power, and they continue to consume. What the new administration does could switch, how perceptions are, and whether people get worried of whether they'll have a job and they'll have money to continue to spend. But before the election, there was an expectation that, real GDP would slow down quite significantly to maybe like 1.5 to 1.8% in 2025. So the new election results might affect where that trend goes. Now, I talked about inflation being higher for over 40 years higher at one point. This shows us what the November reading was for inflation with all items, is the headline inflation of 2.7. That actually increased from 2.6. So it's not great. It has increased for a couple of months now. So the Fed really wanted to see a standard or like a continuous decline in inflation towards 2.0, their target. So when it goes up, even though it's only by a little bit, it's not a great story. It makes the Fed's job harder. And we can see that now it's the core inflation, so all items less food and energy, because food and energy are more volatile prices. It's still at 3.3%, so much higher than the 2% target. And if we compare it with other countries, we can see that the item that has been really affecting these prices is services. Services continue to grow at more than double the the rate of the overall inflation and inflation target. So that's a concern and something that the Fed and other central banks are monitoring. Now, the Fed funds target rate, this is now between 4.5 and 4.75. Everyone expects this week that there will be another cut of 25 basis points, but there's a lot of stories that the Fed may pause for a while in 2025 to see what the impact of the new policies by the new administration will have on inflation. And this is the expected future rate cuts for the major central banks. So the Fed is in that lighter blue. It's expected to stabilize around just below 4%. Now, of course, this gets updated every day. This is based on futures trading markets. So investors do change significantly their views of what's coming. But we're talking about, indeed, they are also expecting some pause in rate cuts during 2025. So only very gradual the decreases in rate cuts. And then on the projected, let me just give you like a couple of updates on the projected economic growth. We're really only showing you like long-term for your terminal year computations when you're having a discounted cash flow approach. What are some of the expectations by market participants? And this is like actually economists from various reputable sources. Some of these sources are actually a compilation of surveys of various providers and professional forecasters. And right now we're at 2.3% median, so a little bit above the 2% target. This is over the next 10 years. And real GDP likewise is at 2%. It has gone up progressively this year, and which is a reversal of fortunes for the United States. It had been gradually going down for the long run. Part of this might be partially explained by the expectations that AI will increase productivity so significantly that it will have an impact on real GDP growth potential in the United States. If you put those together, you get to a combined long-term growth rate in nominal terms of expected 4.3%. You want to have, you want to be careful about growing your DCF at a rate greater than the overall economy. Obviously, it depends on where you put your terminal year. If it's immediately, just after 1 or 2 years, and use a cap rate, or if it's longer. But unless you're in the technology space, you shouldn't really be expecting to grow at a rate higher than the overall economy. And finally, a little bit of a highlight on financial markets. Financial markets, I mean, this is only through November 18, but I'm sure you've been paying attention that the S&P 500 has continued to go up and reach new record highs after the election. So, it's above 6,000, the level. It's been an impressive year of returns, and the expectations of pro-growth policies and less regulation are really creating optimism in markets. I would say that maybe there's a little bit of a frothiness, meaning that there's expectations that everything will go well. So next year probably we'll see a little bit of volatility back and forth until when new announcements come from the new administration of what the plans actually are for some of the promises that were outlined during the campaign. What we can see in general historically, since JFK's election date until Biden's election date in 2020, that it tended to be the case that 12 months after the election day, markets actually did better than before the election. And that was really because investors like certainty. They like to be able to plan around what's going to happen. So uncertainty is usually not great for the overall market. And then finally, and this is our last slide, which is about, since 1960, since JFK, so since 1961 through November 18, looking at the returns on the S&P 500, depending on who controlled the presidency, the House, and the Senate. And the united government, where everybody is like Republican or everybody's Democrat, but we're calling here in the middle of the table a united government. And that's about the average S&P return, over the same period. The S&P compounded annual return is around 7 to 8%, 7.5%. So that's where you get the middle of the ground. Where you seem to get the highest bang for your buck, if you will, during these presidencies is whether you'd have a Democratic president and then have Republican House or Senate, or a combination thereof seem to get you the highest return. So that would include, for example, Bill Clinton in there. So just something for us to observe, what happens, depending on who controls the House and the Senate versus the presidency, whether things get done or not, and whether that benefits the market. With that, I would like to stop and give it over. Is it Mel? You're going to take over from here?
Carla, thank you so much. I'm just fascinated with some of this stuff and what's going on, and it's going to be interesting to watch it unfold in the coming years at the consumer level.
Yeah. Yes. You and me both.
Exactly. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And
Thanks for
now
having
we're gonna move to our segment with the honorable judges and Alan Zipp. Alan, it's always good to see you, my friend. This one's going to be fascinating. You mean opposing experts lie? I mean, no, come on. So I'm gonna turn it over to you. We're gonna have some conversations around dealing with opposing experts and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they're not telling the truth. So thank you, Alan.
My pleasure. Let me see how I can do this screen share. Is that me? Did I do that?
Yeah, you're doing it. There you go.
Now I got to figure out how to make it work. Oh, okay.
There you go.
And I apologize. I am technologically a dinosaur, and everything that happens to me is I can't get the thing to work. So now we're going to try it. This is going to be a fun day for, there we go. Let me get the screen on. We're going to talk really about how, and I really want the judges. I just got to say thank you, judges, for coming. Judge Platt, Judge Driscoll, Judge Yates, you guys are so helpful to us as practitioners. And this, I just can't emphasize it enough. We're doing a piece in our regional conference on this very topic of testifying, and we're bringing a judge in, a local judge, to do exactly what we're asking you to do today. Is what do we do in the real world? And this is what I just had a trial, 2-day trial the other day that I testified, and the other side actually didn't tell the truth. So my bio is here, and Judge Driscoll's bio, and Judge Platt, and Judge Yates. And the issue really is, and I don't know how it got, anyhow, the issue is what if the other side is not telling the truth, not being honest and straightforward, not following the ethics? And I always like to start with a rule, because if we as experts have a rule to follow, we can review everything about it that we can find. But let me start with Rule 702, because that permits us as experts to provide testimony if it will assist the trier of fact to understand the evidence or to determine a fact and issue. But opinions on credibility, that's different than expert testimony, and this is where we need your help. It's inadmissible when they encroach on the jury's function or the fact finder's function to judge the credibility of the witness. And in most jurisdictions, every witness is prohibited from testifying that the testimony given by another is true or that it is false. And this prohibition applies whether it's expert or non-expert. Judges, please, any order you like. Judge Driscoll's first on my list. But
sure. So yeah, right. I always get my elbows out to talk first, and it's so nice to be with all of you today. I saw many of you at our conference in Las Vegas last week. And in the words of the biblical admonition, when two or more gather in my name, there I am among you. So Judge Yates was not among us, but we gathered in his name, and he was very much on our minds, and we spoke of him with reverence, as we always do. Alan, before I answer your question, I'm going to take the judge's prerogative of challenging a premise in the question. You used different words for not telling the truth. You used lie, testify falsely. I don't think you used prevaricate, which is one of my favorite words. But I want to just start with that premise even before we get to Rule 702, because in my jurisdiction, and the way I was trained when I was a young prosecutor, was you don't really want to say lie. You want to say less than truthful, because lie implies an actual state of mind to deliberately obfuscate the truth. And that's a heavier burden, and not a burden that you need to reach as an advocate. You're not an advocate, you're an expert, but not a burden that retaining counsel has to meet. They don't have to meet that you deliberately weren't truthful. They just have to meet that you were not truthful, or that the expert was not truthful. So I just want to be clear that the mission is not to get into the mind of the opposing expert, whether it's on your part as one expert or on the part of your retaining counsel. The mission is really to show that witness, for whatever reason, is not telling the truth. The witness could be not telling the truth because they're lying. They could be telling the truth because they're mistaken about a fact, or about the application of or about a methodology, or the application of methodology to the fact. So I just want to start with that. And then I just want to pick up on the point you made, which is a perfect place to start, which is that, judges don't get excited about overseeing a battle between two pre-teenagers. And that's what it becomes if it's, well, Alan's lying. No, Tim is lying. No, Chris is lying. No, Steve is lying. So nobody's going to allow that to happen, because that's not exciting in our personal lives, and it's not admissible. You're absolutely right that it is not admissible in our courtrooms for folks to be saying, no, he's lying. No, he's lying. That is the trier of facts province. But let's get back to Rule 702, and this is where it's clear that it's not your mission to say other witness is not telling the truth. But we'll talk about some ways that you can still get that point out without saying it. Your mission as an expert is to comply with Rule 702. Rule 702 has 4 requirements. Do you have the appropriate expertise by education or by experience? Did you get an appropriate factual basis upon which to make opinions? Again, we'll highlight this in our discussions. Did you use an appropriate scientific methodology? And then 4th, did you apply that scientific methodology to the facts of the case? That's where when the other side's witness is being less than truthful for whatever reason, whether intentional or mistaken, those are the points at where your testimony can be helpful, because again, that's a standard, helpful to the trier of fact in pointing out any insufficiencies in the opposing expert's testimony. So I've spent a lot of time on that first slide, and I apologize to my fellow judges who always know that I can't keep my mouth shut at the beginning of this segment. So I'll turn it over to them.
I'll just add 2 specific points to what Judge Driscoll said, because his analysis, I think, is spot on. The first thing I'll say is that although you can't say that the other expert's opinion is false, you can certainly take issue with the specific elements of the other expert's testimony. And as a matter of fact, that's not only commonplace, it's expected. And so you have to leave it to somebody else, the trier of fact, to draw the conclusion that the other expert's testimony is false. But there's nothing wrong with poking holes in their analysis and identifying what they said as being incorrect. The second thing that I would say is, with regard to when someone's actually lying, sometimes this requires some patience, but you have to trust us that many of us understand when someone's lying. And on a couple of occasions when I was presiding and I knew somebody was lying, not just making false statements, but actually lying, I called counsel to the bench, excused the jury, and said, all right, look, we're going to take a 15-minute recess. I want you to take this witness out in the hall. I want you to talk to this witness. I want you to explain how serious perjury is. And if I hear any more of this testimony, will not hesitate to make a criminal referral in this case. Now, that is very, very rare for that to happen. But if it gets bad enough, you have to trust the judge will understand how incorrect the testimony is, to the point that we believe, as Judge Driscoll says, we can make the leap to the conclusion that it's actually a lie.
And Judge Yates, before we get to Judge Platt, that scenario you described, that was not with respect to an expert, I imagine. It was with respect to a fact witness?
No, fact witnesses.
Yeah.
Fact witnesses, right. Yeah. Yep. Every time a fact witness. Because when you sit through the whole trial as a judge, you pretty clearly understand when somebody's testimony is at variance with everything else and reason as well.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add a couple of things. One, the world is changing, and we live in a world where the term alternative facts actually has meaning. And there are some witnesses, both expert and otherwise, who don't necessarily reject the fact that there could be alternative facts. Secondly, if you as an expert or any witness, but if you as the minute you start using the word, as Judge Driscoll said, lying or anything like that, you just branded yourself as an advocate and not as an expert. Because if you do that, then you've gone over that line. You can't, besides the fact that it's inadmissible. But one of the things that we get and I would focus on the word in the rule, expert testimony. That's where you can't say it. That's in a courtroom. If you're not in a courtroom and you're not under oath, you can, and perhaps in some instances should, and I'll use an example of, again, my world. If I'm in a mediation and you as an expert are present, that's a whole nother issue, but if you're there and the other side is using their expert either because he or she is there or because they're using their opinion to leverage, you could, to answer the question that maybe is down the road, you could be helpful by explaining to the mediator what questions he or she ought to ask in the other room of the opinion that you intuitively understand to be not correct or whatever. I like the word spin just because I had a political background before I went on the bench and never again had a partisan thought. But it's important to remember, I've seen reports from experts, in one case, a couple doctors, who flat out said that this diagnosis is, he used the word incorrect and intended to deceive. That's unusual. That's not in a courtroom. That's in a report. If you know it's there and you put it in there, but again, what you're doing is the trade-off is you're branding yourself. There was been a couple of good suggestions as to whether to staying the word lying, but you could say I disagree with him or her because, and the because sends the message that they're, whatever that is, that they're not telling the truth. We also get some experts and some lawyers, unfortunately, who don't know the difference between opinion and facts. And I feed motions for summary judgment that in effect ask that the court find that, or whoever the court find that there's no dispute as to any material fact based on the opinion of this expert. Well, by definition, the opinion is not a fact. And the opinion about the issue is not a fact. So there are various ways to send the message, but this bottom line rule that it's not admissible as testimony in a courtroom there's no dispute about that. What is the question is, how do you best do it when it happens? And I know that's down the road. That's a couple of questions down the road. So I'll leave it at that. It makes a difference what forum you're in and where you are and how you're doing it.
Judge Platt, was it okay for the witness to say, opposing witness was incorrect? Because I don't know if I'd have a problem with that, because that's not getting into the state of mind of the mistruth or of the not truthful statement. And again, I don't want to hear that it's a lie.
That word,
It's a lie,
well,
right?
it may not be the best word to use, but it's I think it's usable, and
Yeah.
because it's an opinion,
Mhm.
and to say that somebody is lying, incorrect doesn't accuse them of knowing that they're not telling the truth.
Right.
It implies it, but it doesn't do it. So that might well depend on who the judge is
Mhm.
and what his or her experience is with this. And also, contrary to conventional wisdom, judges do gossip, and the gossip is, did you have expert A in your courtroom this week? Yes. He said the same thing they said 50 other times. Or in some cases, I've noted in having gossip sessions, I could write that expert's report.
Let me lead you a little bit then. What if this false statement is in the report? Now, let me give you through a few thoughts of what we do in, at least my side, but I'd like to get your thoughts on the perspective. For example, if it's in the report, should we explain to the retaining attorney the scope of that issue? Do we let the retaining attorney file a motion in limine as appropriate? How about using that information for cross-examination by retaining counsel? Now, how can we prepare to tell the judge of the false information? And should we just develop direct examination questions with retaining counsel to bring it out? These are just thoughts. Can we get some, your thoughts?
So I see life in terms of 1980s music and movies. So I'm going to quote two songs that I think illustrate the point. And the first is the song Talk Talk by the English techno band Talk Talk from 1981. Talk Talk. Yes, you see a problem in the report. You're being paid for your expertise. And you're being paid because retaining counsel don't know what you know. All right. We were just in Vegas and there was a country music concert. So I'm also seeing things in terms of country music songs, right? So I don't know what I don't know. Sounds like a Hank Williams song. Well, it happens to be what retaining counsel is thinking. So talk to retaining counsel. Second 80s song, Billy Joel from the 1981 Innocent Man album. Tell her about it, meaning you got to tell the judge has got to be told about it. And yes, I think it is appropriate for a motion in limine. But Alan, you raised a good question. Let the retaining attorney file a motion in limine. Retaining attorney is going to file that motion in limine whether you let them or not. So I think you want to lead opposing counsel with all of the facts so that, hey, you may want to think about a motion limit. I'll leave it to you, retaining counsel, because retaining counsel may not want to do that because that may take the sting out of cross-examination. Or retaining counsel might know that the judge doesn't like motions in limine, or that the judge doesn't like the way retaining counsel files the motions in limine. So I think it's incumbent upon you as an expert to let retaining counsel know everything. And yes, encourage retaining counsel to file a motion if appropriate, but let retaining counsel do their own job too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. There are lots of ways to go after untruthful testimony, but the most powerful way in terms of affecting the outcome of the case is on cross-examination. And so to the extent that you want to disqualify someone before trial, whether in a Daubert hearing or otherwise, it's much more likely that your retaining counsel would rather save that ammunition for trial and then demolish the other side's.
The only thing I would just add to that with regard to motions in limine, and as both Judge Yates and Judge Driscoll noted, know your judge. But besides that, if motions in limine are granted or denied, and there are some judges who won't grant them at all, there's some who are gung-ho enthusiastic. But what needs to be kept in mind is the only time that you as an expert could ever, quote, inform the judge about any other witness's testimony or in any way is when you're on the stand. It's not appropriate to asked to address the court, except through retaining counsel or otherwise, for that purpose. Secondly, again, the bottom line is that if you don't do that, if you've told retaining counsel, motions in limine are granted or denied on the basis of evidence. There are evidentiary rules that control. Very few judges are going to grant a motion in limine because the motion in limine essentially is grounded in the proposition that the person is not going to be credible or not going to tell the truth. Most judges instinctively will say, well, that's for the fact finder, whether it's me or the jury to determine, not me in advance, saying that I don't believe you, therefore I'm not going to let you say that.
And in a bench trial, motions in limine,
I can't imagine ever granting it.
Right. I mean, I like the education, but thank you. I'm on the edge of my seat for cross-examination. So again, so don't be offended if you're, our dear audience, if retaining counsel says thanks but no thanks on the idea of filing a motion in limine, if it's in a bench trial, because as Judge Platt said, I don't know when I've granted it. I don't know when he's granted. He's been a judge for.
I once said to somebody I knew well enough to say it, that when they filed a motion in limine on the basis of that in a case where I was the judge and there was no jury, is this the beginning of the silly season? Turned out it was.
What about if it's in testimony as opposed to being in the report? What do we do when, we're listening to each other as two experts, and the other expert is saying something that is not accurate, that's maybe deliberately or unintentionally false, but do we try to tell the retaining attorney at a recess break, or should we be prepared to tell the judge of the false information, or what do we do with regard to maybe the facts and documents to provide evidence of the truth? Do we prepare for that on redirect?
I would say back to Judge Driscoll's first song.
Okay.
Talk.
Yeah.
Not necessarily wait for recess. Depends on whether you can talk to your counsel without interrupting what's going on in the courtroom. But sooner the better.
I was just thinking, Judge Platt went to dance clubs when that song was out. I was 12, but he was a little older than that, and he was maybe boogieing to that song.
I was somewhat more mature at that point.
If I could offer one bit of guidance on this point, whatever you do, don't walk up to the lawyer who's conducting cross-examination and try to pass a note. I've never seen anything that gets lawyers more angry than that. I've had people try to do that to me. I had somebody try to do it to me at an oral argument one time, and my first instinct was to want to punch the person. I mean, I'm focused. I'm doing the best I can here. At the first break, absolutely. And definitely before closing argument, because one of the things I think we'll all tell you is that some of the best ammunition you have is what you want to keep your powder dry on until you get to closing argument, because by then there's no chance for the witness to respond. If a witness says something that's demonstrably false based on the record in the case, sometimes your retaining counsel will decide not to say one word about it, let it sit there and come out and just blast away in closing argument on it.
If and I would just add to that, depositions are key, and we'll talk about that. But that's an example where a sophisticated counsel knows that an expert is not telling the truth or spinning or whatever, and doesn't say anything. If that witness knows what they're doing and knows that, and is a little surprised that nothing was said, or that means they think the experienced counsel may think it's better. I'm not going to let him know what's going to happen in the courtroom if he does that.
Yeah, I can tell you, Judge Driscoll and I were both federal prosecutors lots of jobs ago, and there's nothing better than when a defendant takes a stand and says something extraordinarily stupid. Often I would do nothing with it on cross except to say, you said this Is that right? And then they'll say it, and that becomes the main theme of closing arguments.
Mhm.
I mean, this is what this idiot expects you to believe.
Mhm.
When I just had this happen the last week at a trial where the rebuttal report was not introduced in evidence because of my testimony, and on direct examination we had literally prepared for this, where the opposing expert relied on testimony or relied on information from the client without verifying any of it, and then adopted that as his own opinion. That was pretty bad.
Yeah.
Well, I imagine that expert is now looking for a different line of side hustle other than being an expert.
Yeah, that's malpractice.
And that's a feast for not just cross-examination in that case, but cases down the road. Isn't it true that in such and such a case, you were before Judge Yates, and Judge Yates did not permit you to testify because of XYZ? I mean, remember what you're doing in the case is not just this case, it's your reputation, as Judge Platt was pointing out earlier.
Yeah, and at best, there's a contribution to luncheon discussions.
Yeah, this is a real world situation, and the problem is that not every expert is trained in the law and understands how to do this, and that's why your guidance today is so important to us, and what you do at the conferences. But here's a couple of examples where opposing expert declares something is true when it's not true. Where the expert relied solely on what the client told him without any independent review, and then declared that to be the expert's professional opinion, which happened the other day. Or the opposing expert misapplied a generally accepted business valuation procedure. These happen routinely. I'd love to have your thoughts on what to do. I mean, this is real world.
The factual questions are a little easier to deal with. The bullet point 1 and bullet point 2 are easier to deal with for related reasons. Somebody says something, it's true when it's not. The sun rises in the west, and that's what I based my opinion on. Well, that's wonderful. Now, but again, that could just be simply an expert being mistaken. The expert relying on something the client tells him that, again, turns out not to be true, is even more fun as retaining counsel, or as cross-examining counsel, because not only do you have that the fact isn't true, but you have that the expert didn't do a detached review of what the facts are, but simply accepted from the client what the facts are. The third bullet point is a little bit harder because misapplied. Well, that sounds like opinion. And maybe the judge hears it differently, that it wasn't misapplied. It might have been applied, well, perhaps not perfectly, but all right, I'll still take it for what it's worth, which might be more common in a bench trial. So, don't be hurt if the judge isn't all that interested in hearing about bullet point 3 if you're on the stand critiquing opposing expert, because the judge might say, okay, thank you, counsel. I get that you have a different view. Tell me what you did.
Tell me what you did is an important question in every case, including what we spent some time in Las Vegas talking about. And it was pointed out, AI doesn't know it's lying.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was reliance there, that gets out. It turns out, and then the question is, how does the witness react when that is under discussion? Does he or she double down, or do they concede that they didn't check their work? And if the double down is can be a bigger problem. But when you're offering an opinion, and the opinion is based on that information, which 702 did what it did, but it also doubled down on the importance of the data that the expert is relying upon. Because if you can't attack if the qualifications are there, or at least arguable, your better way of attack is What did you base that on? What did you do with the information you were given? Who gave you the information? Where did you get it? And did you check it?
Right.
And if if any of that's not there, then the opinion is starting to get shaky in terms of its admissibility. Trial judges around the country that are, Maryland, for instance, just adopted Daubert about 2.5 years ago. The appellate courts haven't issued a whole lot of guidance, and so what you're getting is it depends on what jurisdiction you're in and what judge in that jurisdiction as to how they're interpreting their newly found responsibility, and whether they like it or not. But the bottom line is that the sources of information, and as Judge Paul Grimm, who's somewhat of an expert, has said, the admissibility of it is a preponderance of the evidence burden. And again, based on what? And if the what becomes at issue, then the question is how much of an issue is it? And is it going to keep the opinion out? The cop out is, well, we'll let it in, but we'll give it whatever weight it deserves, which by the tone of the voice of the judge when he says that may be little, if any.
Can we get your thoughts on these thoughts on the screen? That how do we protect our integrity when the opposing expert is violating ethical standards? And what is the appropriate method of presenting our testimony in light of contradictory and erroneous testimony from the opposing expert? And how does the judge view disagreeing experts as biased or otherwise not credible? This is helpful to us. If you could help give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll answer the third one. It's the easiest. Does the judge view disagreeing experts as biased or otherwise not credible? Not necessarily. This is what we do. And
right, and
it's not unexpected that will occur. I mean, the case is being litigated. It's being litigated because there probably is a disagreement, among others, by the experts. So it's not a shock that they disagree, and it's not credible. It doesn't affect the credibility as long as their disagreement is evidentiary based or fact based and not just bought and sold.
And with regard to the second one, if we want to work up, I would say that the best way to handle that is to take apart the other expert's position piece by piece, rather than to go after it as being erroneous or contradictory. Let the finder of fact draw that conclusion. It's frustrating, I know, but one of the things that I always told witnesses when I was trying cases and prepping them is, you don't need to win this case on your own. You are a very important part of our presentation, but there are lots of other important parts of our presentation as well. And so if you can stick to the questions I ask, particularly if the direct is set up well, you can absolutely demolish the other side's opinion and then let the finder of fact draw that conclusion that the other expert's testimony is contradicted by all the evidence or just simply erroneous.
And I'll just pick up and I agree with everything my colleagues have said. And I want to quote a brilliant scholar, Judge Steve Platt, with respect to the first point, is, you don't want to roll around in the mud when and feel I'm taking this so personally. I'm protecting the integrity of my profession. Because when you roll around in the mud, as Judge Platt says, two things happen. You get dirty and the pig enjoys it. All right. So just to keep those in mind.
The only other thing I would say along those lines is, and we mentioned this both, in fact, we focused both in Las Vegas, as far as how does a judge deal with expert, not as far as the integrity is concerned that's a job for NACFA. Okay. NACFA needs to educate its members, but also the public, about the importance of expert opinions. There is around the country defenses that essentially are experts are elite. Elites aren't to be trusted. Don't believe a word they say, regardless of who called them. And we don't really need experts. And my quote that I used is, I can't remember who said it, but it was, my ignorance is just as good as your intelligence and expertise.
That's
So
really
NACFA has a job to do, and it is not just to educate its members, it is to educate the public that their opinion, the expert opinions on what you do, as well as other expert opinions, have value, should have value, and our system will break down if it doesn't.
a couple of other thoughts before we finish this session. How does a judge deal with an expert witness who is testifying falsely? And do you look at the documentary evidence that is submitted as evidence admitted in the trial? Do you ever go back to review that in considering the veracity of an expert testimony?
I sure as hell hope we do.
Yeah.
You're right. Everything's on reflection. Sure. And we're not saying, again, we're not saying lying. We're saying I do not credit expert Jones's testimony because, again, didn't get sufficient facts, relied on facts that didn't appear to be supported by the record. Again, you'll see those kind of themes there. The methodology not grounded in science, and indeed does not appear to be a methodology. I'm a Fry jurisdiction, so does not appear to be a methodology generally accepted in the scientific community. You'll see all of those different themes woven throughout. So I hope you can trust us. I hope you can trust us. You know, we're human too. We're trying our best, but this is what we do, as Judge Platt said. We reflect with a full record in front of us, and we rely on you and on retaining counsel to give us the information so that we can have a full record to reflect.
Right. And I would say this, that in putting together an opinion, and I always wrote opinions with my findings of fact, conclusions of law, and verdict when I was the trier of fact, I would go through the record with a fine-tooth comb. And so, Ellen, I would pick up on the sort of things that you described. It's a completely separate analysis, which I conducted very occasionally, about whether to refer a witness to the prosecutor's office for a perjury charge, or more likely an attorney to the Attorney Grievance Commission for proceedings, or at least an investigation. But I would treat that as a decision wholly separate from the analysis of the case and rendering my findings of fact, conclusions, law, and the verdict.
That's great. Well, this has been one of the better sessions that we have had together, because it's been longer. We didn't get cut off too quickly, but Michael Kaplan is going to join the group. And I'd like to ask Michael, have you had any experiences as an expert in your cases, and how'd you handle them, and would you comment on them?
Absolutely. I've had it. I've had it happen. I've seen a number of experts, more than I would like to count, who get on the witness stand and lie. And they give their testimony in the form of untruths. I won't get into the mud. I don't believe an expert should get into the mud and roll around with the opposing expert. What the expert needs to remember is we are an evidence-based group. Our opinions are based upon the evidence. We take the evidence, and what gets us from the evidence to our opinions is a protocol that's founded in professional standards and generally accepted methodology. And if the expert on the other side lies, and I'm on the witness stand, I'm called back to opine, among other things, as to the other expert's opinions, I'll testify that I've heard his opinions and that they're not based upon the facts. They're not based upon the evidence. And I'll cite the evidence that would support an opinion about that particular issue and demonstrate how that expert did not build his or her opinions based upon the evidence. And by the same token, I'm going to look at professional standards and demonstrate how that expert departed from professional standards to get to his or her opinion, and how, had they not departed from the standards, they would have reached the appropriate opinion. So that's To me, it's a matter of being very, very professional. I take on the issue, I don't take on the person. And that keeps me clean, but it gets my point across as to what's wrong with what the other expert did.
But I throw in one more thing in light of what Michael said, and I think it goes to what we're talking about. I've noticed, and we focused on this a little bit in Las Vegas. Watch your retain your engagement letter or your retaining agreement or whatever it is, and look at that. And this is in light of what Michael said. Look at the process. If it spells out some that this is what you want, and you're being hired to render an opinion using the following procedure. Some of them are quite detailed, and you could look at that, and you know enough to know that procedure is designed to get a particular opinion, and it does not meet professional standards. If that's the case, you've got a decision to make, and the decision is to talk to retaining counsel and say, I know what you're trying to do, and I know what this says, and you're opening yourself up to some very effective cross-examination and perhaps some ethical issues in a way that I don't think you want to do, and I don't think your client wants to do. And I think that I would not be doing my job if I didn't tell you that. I've seen these engagement letters that call for just bizarre procedures designed to get to a particular opinion, and the experts that sign on to that are usually inexperienced or cynical or both, and have in effect saying, I'm going to do what I'm asked to do, and that's their testimony when it's called into question.
Outstanding. Well, before we finish up, is there any other comments that Judge Driscoll or Judge Yates would like to add? Because this has been wonderful. This has been very effective, I think.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think Michael hit the nail on the head. That you attack the opinion, you don't attack the person.
Yeah, don't make it personal.
Right.
As
Yep.
Michael Corleone said in The Godfather, it's strictly business.
Thank you very, very much.
I would add that I'm just disappointed that Judge Driscoll didn't wear his cowboy hat.
That would have been perfect.
Happy Christmas to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy
Thank you.
holidays,
Merry
everybody.
Christmas to everyone, and thank you for being with us today. And thank you for that session, and also for being with us last week. So it's always great having you. And now we are, as part of our last session, today we are joined by Arli Cornejal. She's the finance program manager at Start Small, Think Big. I love that name. And so, Arli, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you as well.
Many of our members, let me share my screen just to make sure that we all have the information. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Perfect. So many of our members are passionate about volunteering their time to various organizations. So we are excited to learn more about yours. Can you provide us with an overview of Start Small, Think Big and its mission to support small business entrepreneurs?
Yes, of course. So we are a national-based nonprofit. We've been around for over 10 years, and really our main mission is to advance equity and support entrepreneurship, and we do that by providing both financial and legal services to entrepreneurs. It's all done remotely, and it's entrepreneurs are able to get bookkeeping support, production support, contract support. And most of our entrepreneurs are a business that's owned by a woman or a person of color.
Okay, so that was going to be my next questions. Which are your usual partners in terms of services that you provide to them, and what challenges do they face that are the priority that you seek to address with these services?
Yes, as I mentioned before, most of our entrepreneurs have a business. As you see, almost 90% of them are owned by a person of color and are women. This is a breakdown of the industries that we work with. So that would be personal services, food, personnel, accessories, retail, and other. Most of our clients are not in the seed stage, so we do want to see at least 2 months of sales in the last, at least 2 months of sales. But most of them have been, going about their business for over a year, and the minority of them have been doing it for less than a year. And clients definitely come with lots of questions. Some of them, maybe newer to the business, so they're getting to know finance, bookkeeping, and thinking about their pricing. To other, questions about legal. They might have questions about their entity. So they come with various questions, and it's really helpful for them to meet with extra volunteers in finance and in legal to go over these questions pro bono. It really gives them a support to think about, how should I be pricing my products or services?
So it would be basically for us to volunteer, it would be basically something that is maybe basic for us, as doing projections and helping with pricing, things that we do every day, but helping them to grow, because they may have a skill that is manufacturing something, creating something, providing a service, but not necessarily they have the knowledge, the financial knowledge, right?
Exactly. And I hear entrepreneurs, tell me, wow, that was an amazing, 1 hour session. I got to cover a lot of these questions, or maybe they just want to understand better what it is about business finance and get those basic concepts down. So it really is helpful, to relate that knowledge to entrepreneurs.
Okay. So what tangible outcomes have you seen as a result of this initiative, in terms of once you provide the services to these entrepreneurs, what are the results?
So yes, we're seeing amazing results. So we're seeing, one, that entrepreneurs are surviving at a very high rate. 90% of entrepreneurs are surviving. And we're also seeing an increase in revenue for entrepreneurs. We do a survey at half a year and 1 year. We're seeing, entrepreneurs' businesses grow. Maybe they're now in a brick and mortar store. Maybe they've added a second location. Maybe they've, increased their pricing, and whatever it is, we're definitely seeing very tangible action steps at the end of these calls.
That has to be really exciting for the volunteer to see in the future the results of, that they taught to those entrepreneurs. So as a volunteer, what is the typical profile of the volunteer that you are looking for?
So we do want to see volunteers that have experience in the field. So I believe everyone here at NACBA would be eligible. I know we just had a session earlier this month with volunteers from NACBA. They did a 1-hour session. So really we're looking for experience in the financial field. That's what we want. We don't take any students. Of course, I'm sure that's not the audience here, but definitely want to see just experience.
And I can say it's very easy. You go through your website. So I'll put the website on the chat so everyone can have it. And I went through it. I looked for the services that I can provide as to volunteer to them people, and I receive an email. And after that, you get another email to coordinate that initial onboarding session. So it's very easy as a volunteer to join you on this endeavor. And in terms of financial information, how a typical 1-hour consultation looks like. I know you have in here an example that includes calculate unit costs and pricing and prepare financial projections. How does it look?
So ahead of the call, you'll receive some information of the business owner, including their business background, their website. Maybe they've included a few documents for you to review. It's not always the case, though. So you're gonna get some information ahead of the call. And then actually the next, so you see a little bit about what you might get ahead of the call, but really it's all gonna take place during that 1 hour call. So getting to know the entrepreneur, then going through, their goal, or maybe going around pricing or projections. We do have a spreadsheet that you can use that goes over, all of these different segments you might go through. Yes, typically they're just an hour call, and you're welcome to do, additional call after that, but it's not required. It's really flexible.
Okay, so not necessarily they need to feel that I'm gonna volunteer an hour and then this is gonna be my responsibility and I have to follow up on this person all the time.
Exactly. No, it's when you volunteer through us, usually, we tell both entrepreneurs and volunteers, it's limited to 1 hour. Of course, you can go ahead and ask to see if it makes sense to meet again, or if it works for both parties. But of course, you're not required to do this afterwards.
For the different services, are there any templates that we need to use as the ones that you are showing on this presentation, or we will work with whatever we have on hand?
Yes, you can definitely use what you've maybe already been using in the last few years in your work. We also have our own spreadsheet template that you're welcome to use. We also share this with our entrepreneurs, so they've already seen this template, and it goes through, going through our COGS, our break-even point, our projections for 1 year, 3 years. It has all these different tabs, and you're welcome to use that as well. And it's been helpful for both entrepreneurs and volunteers to have the same template.
Is there any specific area that you want to go over this presentation? Because I've been moving it, but I don't know if you want to go over any of these slides.
No, I think we can skip to the end. I know it's like a little bit of a long slideshow, but as you mentioned, it's very easy to apply to be a volunteer. You can go ahead and click the link I just added to the chat, and
Thank you.
go through afterwards. After you apply, you will go through an orientation, and it's just half an hour, and we go over this in more detail. We go over, we have our own portal where you can then pick who to work with. So it's very easy to just go through that. And it's a very flexible way to volunteer. So if you're only available to volunteer, say, once a month, that's still amazing. We definitely love our volunteers who have, either kind of capacity, whether it's once a month or once a week. We welcome all of that.
Okay, so you mentioned that we go as volunteers, go through your platform, and we decide who is going to be the best fit for us. Is not something that you assign, so we can pick.
Yes, so you can go through, once you're an approved volunteer, you can go through our portal and you can see everyone who's requested support in bookkeeping or projections, and you can select who to work with. You'll see their website and business background. So that's kind of a way that it's matched. You can also sign up for our bi-weekly calls, and then I'll be the one matching you to an entrepreneur, and usually at 5 p.m. on Tuesdays.
Okay, so that is great, because if I have an industry that is my specialty, probably I'll go through that specific industry. It's going to be easier for me to help someone. Okay, that's amazing. Something else that you want to share with us and to encourage us to join you in this effort?
I'm sure that maybe you know someone who's volunteer, maybe even in this call. So definitely talk to your fellow NACFA folks who maybe volunteer to hear about their experiences. I know folks definitely find it very rewarding to, share the wealth of knowledge that they already have to entrepreneurs who maybe just entering the field or just want that extra support. So again, we definitely see the value that it provides.
Thank you, Arli, for being with us next week. And hopefully after this call, you receive a lot of emails from our members able to help, especially during this season, right? It's helping someone else to make their dreams come true. And sometimes there are people that have all these ideas and they don't know how to develop them in terms of making a business growth. And we have a lot of people that need our help.
Thank you so much. Exactly.
So thank you, Arli, and Merry Christmas. And so with this presentation, we just arrived to the end of our monthly show. We will join you this next year. So hopefully you are with us next year. It's going to be January 13, 2025. So it was great having you all here. We appreciate all the presenters that joined us this week and the correspondent. And Merry Christmas to all of you and Happy New Year.